Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on advancing cybersecurity through innovation. We are delighted on behalf of CyberGym IEC to welcome Dunkin and Igal Unna. There will be a chance for you to ask any questions that you have at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A and we will try to answer them as many of them as we can get to. Also, we will send you a copy of the recording after the session. And I think on that note, I hand over to you, Igal.
Well, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. Very glad to be here with all of you, and specifically with you and Dunkin. Well, and you probably, I can tell that you're number one in the world in how to cybersecure energy sector. As the CIO and head of all the cybersecurity, and not just that, all the IT operations of the Department of Energy of the United States of America. Well, it seems to be the biggest role in cybersecuring energy sectors ever before, and I think we'll discuss the growing challenge of doing that. And so, hello, and thank you for having you coming over with us here.
Thanks, Igal. It's a pleasure, and you're too kind in your description of my role and capabilities, but it certainly keeps us all very busy.
No problem of job security here. Yeah,
Right.
I can testify that. So, well, the world is now dealing with the two main things, I think. One is obviously the funeral of late Queen Elizabeth II in the UK. But the second thing that will, unfortunately, will take over the agenda in the coming winter, as we say, winter is coming, is the energy problem, mostly because of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And we begin to see that in the markets and everywhere. I'm now speaking from Frankfurt in Germany, and it is a growing concern for everyone. But what we're going to discuss now is what already is done and what also should be done in cybersecuring the energy sector. Maybe the most important, even before the current crisis, and now even growing in importance. So, Anne, if we talk about cybersecurity as a team sport and a team play, what do you think this analogy means, and how can various stakeholders contribute to this kind of analogy?
Yeah, so within cybersecurity, it has a lot of meanings when you talk about cybersecurity being a team sport. So let's look at our enterprise, whether it's DOE, whether it's the government of Israel, or whether it's CyberGym, right? We've got an enterprise we have to protect. And you have two groups of people that are going to be protecting that. First, it's your cybersecurity professionals who are going to work as a team to identify challenges, right? So to protect your infrastructure, to detect issues and respond to them. But then you have all your end users, and they're part of the team too, because what I always say is that our users can be our greatest asset or our weakest link. And so we need to train our users and make sure they understand the cybersecurity landscape, the threats and the opportunities for us to be successful, and make sure that they are part of the solution and not part of the problem. So that's within the enterprise. And then we look, from my standpoint, the public-private sector partnership. So I've got vendors in the private sector who support me and provide tools and capabilities that we're going to utilize. We're going to give them feedback about their products, and when we identify vulnerabilities or we need new capabilities. So there's a constant dialogue back and forth between those two members of the team. If we look across the federal enterprise in the US government, all those departments and agencies work together. We have various parts of the government that support us, like CISA at DHS, which provides us with a lot of information about vulnerabilities, as well as holding us accountable for remediating vulnerabilities. And they also provide us with information about other things that are challenges that we're seeing in the bigger geopolitical landscape. And then finally, I think I want to mention that the training aspect in terms of training across the federal enterprise. For example, DoD holds a cyber training events, a red team event that we participate in. We at DOE hold our cyber fire events and our cyber force event, which for cyber fire, we invite partners from all over the world, from the public and private sector, to come in, get trained, and then participate in exercises with us. IDO National Lab in Sands, we're recently over in Poland at the Cybersecurity for the Energy Sector Conference for the Central European Grid, working with them, and did a net wars exercise there. So those are examples of how we work together as a team on what was talking with Chris Inglis, our National Cyber Director, who recently, about collective defense. We used to say that I just need to run faster than you do, right? I need to be tougher than you are and stronger, and they'll come bother you. But now we're really looking at this and going, this is a collective defense. We're all going to work together to defend all of us. And that's really what the bottom line is when we talk about a team sport from cyber.
Yes, and I think that the map behind you on the wall is a good description of how big the team that you just described. Yes, it's never ending. We just need to make sure that on the team play, on the dressing room, we have only the right members of the team and not some infiltrators or those who are also trying to hack in and to understand what is the play. So
Absolutely.
you mentioned a training, and you mentioned keeping on practice, and I wanted to emphasize that with Cyber Gym, our host, is a good example of that. I don't know how many of our participants know, but Cyber Gym started as inside operation of the Israeli electric company. So my agency, the former agency, the National Directorate, approached the IEC as, of course, obviously a major critical infrastructure, and guided them to raise up the level of cybersecurity. It was more than 10 years ago, much more. But it took them time to realize that they'll need to also to exercise and to train the team players, as you said. And in order to do that, they found nowhere and no one that can do that except themselves. So they opened a training center and in one of their facilities, and they realized that it's idle like 85% of the time. So they began to make it as a business for like-minded energy sector, and not just the energy sector. Today it's worldwide and other places. So it's a good example of stakeholders that become a real team players that they didn't even imagine that they would turn into such. But yes, the risk and the threats are such that we need to run, as you said, a little faster than we used to. Regarding the best practices, what are some best practices strategies to promote a culture of innovation across all the cyber workforce, not just the energy sector, but other sectors as well?
Yeah, so I think culture of innovation is a challenge for us in the government, and it's especially challenging within cybersecurity. Because one of the things we talk about, we've talked in the U.S. government, and I'll back up a little bit and share some of our background on being more innovative. We had a bit of a crisis in 2012-13 with something you may be familiar with called Obamacare. It was the Affordable Care Act, which is known as Obamacare. And the original implementation of the Affordable Care Act site just was a disaster. And it really brought to the forefront the fact that the U.S. federal government needed to change the way it bought, built, and ran software and products, because we just were wasting too much money and it was taking too long. We weren't getting what we needed. And so we've really pushed on this innovative culture. And one of the tenets of that innovative culture we've taken on is fail fast. And really in cybersecurity, that fail fast isn't really an option like it is in software development. So we need to teach people to be innovative, but we need to look at it from a slightly different lens than we do with software development. So we talk about taking risks in software development. We talk about failing fast. And that is really challenging. It doesn't mean that you can't do any of it in cybersecurity, but we really have to take a totally different mindset. And we have to take a mindset, first of all, that's around risk management, that says we're going to look at our most important risks and secure those things. And those highest risks are, what's the likelihood of something happening, and what's the impact of that, right? And we need to take a very conservative approach in those spaces. And we may not be very innovative in those spaces because we need to secure those assets and be so careful with them. But the rest of the enterprise, we really do need to look at what are some innovative ways to solve our problems, and how can we encourage people to think outside the box, which does in fact mean we have to say to them, go think outside the box, go try something new. And that doesn't mean that trying something new means putting your assets at risk, but it's try something new. It's set up this program, build this capability, test it, see if it's going to work, see if it's going to help. And if it doesn't, let's shut it down. And do that in a quick manner, and do that without spending a lot of money at the beginning. So that's really our focus in creating a culture of innovation, is finding these opportunities to try new things, to build relationships maybe with startup vendors who the US government has a real struggle working with. We really have a hard time getting, because of our procurement rules, getting access to new vendors, working with them to develop their products, determining where they'll meet our needs, and moving forward. And so finding ways to innovatively work with those folks, to try out the new technologies, to see if they'll solve our problems, and if they won't solve our problems, to stop and to move on before we've spent a ton of money on something that's not working for us. So to do that, we have to make sure our employees feel empowered. Right? That's what it comes down to. And I have not worked for the government of Israel or other governments, but I've worked for the U.S. government. I've worked for the U.S. It's a state and local government in the U.S. So I have a suspicion that there's not that much difference from one government to the other in the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy of the U.S. government can wear people down. So after a few years working in the government, they kind of get the attitude that, well, it'll happen when it happens. And so part of that innovation culture is building back that spark of excitement that makes people want to go and solve a problem without waiting for sort of the person next to them to hand them their project. And so that really means we need to empower people. We need to make them feel like they own things and feel like they have agency to solve problems. Those are the things we do to create innovation, are creating those situations where people can take projects and do them and feel like they're empowered to make decisions and get things done themselves. And that works across the environment, not just with software development. It's just that when we start talking about cyber, we have to be a little more careful about the guardrails we put on it.
What I like mostly in what you said is that it's at the beginning, at the end, it's all about the people. With all these cyber schmiber things and IT and technology, yes, it's empowering people. Mm-hmm. I strongly relate to that. Now, you in the DOE, you, and I'm speaking green out of jealous when I say that, you have this amazing chain of national federal laboratories that work under the DOE and for the mission DOE. Can you share us a little about how you harness them? They weren't born in the cyber thing. Yeah. So how you turn them into the right stuff?
So so let's talk about what the national labs are. So there's 17 national labs, and some of those are run by our Office of Science. Some of them are run by the National Nuclear Security Administration. One's run by nuclear energy, and one's run by fossil energy. So they serve a variety of different missions across DOE. Most people are most familiar with the Office of Science labs, but the lab system actually started with the NNSA labs back in the Manhattan Project. So those are the labs that built the original atomic bomb. And those labs still have a nuclear mission primarily, but they have also branched out. So the labs are contractor operated and federally owned. So it's called an M&O lab or an FFRDC from some other parts of the organization might call it that. And what that means is that DOE and others will give those labs an amount of money and say, these are the things we want you to accomplish with this funding. And then the labs, through their overhead, operate the labs themselves and complete this research agenda that we've sent to them. And they do work for others as well. They do work for other parts of the US government. They can do work for the private sector. They can do work for foreign countries, as long as it's within their mission space, which is almost anything. It's very, very broad. Everything from basic science very much to applied.
DOE stands for Department of Everything, right?
Yes, exactly. It's not Department of Energy, it's part of everything. But the way, I mean, so the way you harness that is the labs are full of really, really smart people. Many of them are associated with academic institutions, like Berkeley and Stanford, for example. Some of them aren't. Some of them are run by purely private entities. But we can identify any project we want to work on and a lab that has that competency, and then send that mission to that lab to work on. And over the past 20 years or so, several of our labs have developed deep expertise in cybersecurity. Everything from highly classified work to work that is commercialized and sold to things that are placed in the public domain. So that's how we harness those labs, is we figure out what our research agenda is, and then we work with them to do that. The labs also do self-directed work. Part of their overhead allows them to have money that they use for self-directed research that allows them to build capabilities in new areas and fundamental building blocks that allow them to do support more work for the rest of the organization. And so they will build not only work on their own, but they'll build collaborations with other labs and with other universities and the private sector to expand on their capabilities. And then we're able to tap into the work they have done for themselves, as well as the work that we have contracted for them originally, and expand on that as well. So it's just a tremendous ecosystem of smart people who are doing research. And one of the things we do in my team is we try and catalog and coordinate some of the work. So we can say, for example, on 5G, we went and looked at all the 5G work being done across DOE and said, this is what we do. Hey, everybody else in the federal government, this is what we do. And by the way, we found these 3 or 4 gaps, and now we're going to fund those gaps to make sure that it's a cohesive set of research across the enterprise.
Well, I turned even more green than before after hearing that. And by the way, this is how a big superpower needs to work and to practice in order to maintain the lead in technology, and therefore in everything. In Israel, well, I can share with you that we're a little smaller, but we have the same wishes to get this, and I totally agree about government bureaucracy. Yes, they all work in the same bureaucratic heavy way, but we find a couple of ways to bypass it, to work around it, specifically in cybersecurity, but not only, because in Israel we have tons of innovation, motivation, and ideas that are blown up in the space and need to gather. So one thing that we don't have 17 federal labs that's amazing that you have, but we open one specific lab, cyber energy lab, in Beersheba, in the ecosystem, and we chose it specifically inside the ecosystem in Beersheba. It's 1,000 square meters, that's it. But it's kind of one of the measures that the government do, because when the startups have a difficulty to get the first step into SCADA, into OT, which is expensive and it takes a lot of space and maintenance and a lot of headache to take care of. And we wanted them, all these innovative boiling ideas, to also, as you said, to harness it, to direct it into pains that the government have in the cybersecurity energy sector. So, and not just the energy, OT sector, transportation as well. So it took us a couple of years, a joint operation, by the way, of Israeli Cyber Directorate and the Ministry of Energy of Israel. They understood that as well. And with the collective budget, we managed to open such a lab. It's unclassified, so it's for everyone that have the right criteria to join in, can hop in and with almost no expenses begin working and being innovative and bring new ideas and new solutions that we all still very urgently need them more and more.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity in June to visit the lab. It's great. It's a great start for your lab ecosystem, and we're excited about the opportunity to work together in the lab.
And that brings us to one more thing that of the U.S. and Israel, a long history of bilateral cooperation in cybersecurity, not just in cybersecurity, but we are focusing on it now. So how does collaboration with the international partners benefit cybersecurity efforts, and if I may specifically energy cybersecurity efforts?
So international cooperation is just one of those components of that team sport, right? It's you see the same challenges we see in cybersecurity, and you have a different ecosystem than we do, because your energy sector is one large company. We have many companies, so you have different visibility than we do to our sector, and that's true around the world, right? Each international partner has different situation and different visibility, and slightly different challenges, right? We all live in a slightly different geopolitical world, but ultimately it's the same big geopolitical world, right? You have different regional tensions than we do, but the big picture is the same. And so that opportunity to share information across the board, whether it's American company to Israeli company, if it's government to company, government to government, that bilateral cooperation means that we learn from you, you learn from us, and as a whole, we become stronger. And so we are able to exchange both technical solutions with each other. We're able to exchange information with each other. There are other channels that I'm not involved in that share more classified information among our organizations. But they're that constant back and forth collaboration means that, number one, we can learn about new technologies from each other, but number two, that we're able very much to share those technical capabilities and information across our governments and have that stronger collective defense that we talked about earlier.
And I can add to that well, in my tenure, 4 years tenure, we've signed more than 30 MOUs with the different countries, but actually we were operating with more than 90 countries. And when I say countries, it's 90 flags, but just imagine that the US government is well, 10 different agencies and maybe even more, but and every agency is like a couple of few countries together added up. But the main thing is the understanding, which does not exist, I think, in such magnitude in other fields. The understanding that the need, the urge to work with one another, that there is in the cybersecurity, which is in no other place. And in Israel, I can tell you that last year, the Directorate won the highest Israeli National Security Award. It's very prestigious. It's awarded by the President of Israel. Only 2 or 3 awards a year. The Iron Dome won it a couple of years ago. This kind of magnitude, and usually for high technological achievements. And last year we won it, and I must humbly say it wasn't because of a high technology thing. We won because it wasn't just us. It was 6 agencies, including A200 from the Intelligence Corps and the Mossad and the Shin Bet and the other partners that all comprise the strong fist that fights against cyber threats. and it works for 8 years, and it's on a daily basis of tensions, embedded tensions between all the agencies, but it worked properly because of what you said, the understanding that you must work together, otherwise you will be hang side by side. There's no other way, and we had now the sad anniversary of September 11, which a permanent reminder of the need to share, not just the need to know. In cybersecurity, it's even much more. And thank you for all the partnership and collaboration along the years, and for this important words that need to be heard and to be practiced. Well, as you said, I think most of the data and intelligence, it's not classified in cybersecurity. That's a good thing. Can you share us a little about what you see the future of data collection, data fusion, of how you think it's going to work in cybersecurity, and you're an IT specialist, as I began with one of the highest level in the world.
Well, you got to stop talking me up before I can answer the question. The bar is high. So I think the biggest challenge with data collection in cyber is not collecting data. It's turning that into actionable information. We get so much data. We get logging data, all sorts of alerts, right? There's a ton of information that we see just on our systems. And first, you need good tools that will take that information, take that data, turn it into something that looks like information, or at least filter it enough that what comes to the analysts is meaningful, and then they can analyze that. Then you've got, on top of that, external information coming from suppliers, coming from the intelligence community, that you also have to bring in together and be able to put all that stuff together and understand what your environment is. So I think the future is figuring out how to limit the data so that only actionable information actually comes through. But we're going to have, we all will err on the side of some false positives, because false negatives are way too dangerous, right? To your point, you just described, what you could argue was a false negative, right? We missed something, and that was, had horrible consequences. So in our environments, we're always going to take that extra time to look at things that might not be anything. But we've got to figure out how to limit the data coming in and then synthesize data from across our own ecosystem, across our federal ecosystem, information shared with our international partners, information going to and from the electric sector, so or the energy sector in general, because we support not just electricity, but oil and natural gas and nuclear. Even electricity is a huge part of our role. So we want to share that information out with our private sector partners as well. I have a counterpart who actually does that activity, but we work closely with our Power Marketing Administration. So the U.S. government generates a ton of energy. We've got a network of dams. For people who've not been to the U.S., some of the most beautiful country in the U.S. are some of these areas with these huge rivers and that have dams on them that generate hydroelectric power. The government generates that, DOE markets that, sells it to retail powered companies, and that process is something that my team helps secure that process, and also the energy grid that they run as a consequence of that. So we also share those learnings, the data that comes out of those systems. We synthesize, learn from, and share that with the private sector. So, the key message about data really is how do we turn the dial down so that the flow is manageable, so that we can understand what's there without losing important data. And that's always going to be a challenge, to say the least.
I agree, and I think that relates also for the first topic we discussed about team play, and it's a play of data, a play of insights out of data, and I can tell you and the participants that in Israel we realized that one of the biggest motivation of private sector to cooperate with the government and to share and to open up and to do things that seemingly against their immediate interests, but in the long term that they really are, was the data that we shared with them, the unique insights or things that a private company, with its as big as it is, they don't have what we governments have. To be humble, and this is something that usually governments don't tend to share. But once we understand that in cybersecurity you need to share, just in order to get it done. If you keep all the alerts to yourself, then what good is it? And so the good thing is that once you share, you are getting shared with. So the private sector feels obligated and motivated to share it upwards. And this is a good cycle of data that at the end brings something that the bad guys don't have. They don't work in a team play like that. So this is one of the benefits, the few benefits, that advantages that we, the good guys, have.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, one of the things that bothers us as a government, me formally, but it's still one of the major challenges. How on earth how do you keep the good workforce, the good players in your team, with all the temptations and the things that may be blinking out and calling them to come over?
It's a huge challenge, and there's two things. One is, it's we actually think it's really good for people to cycle in and out of the government. If those good players go to the private sector, as long as they come back, we're happy, right? Because there's things to learn in the private sector, and there's things that the private sector can learn in the public sector. So we really are trying very hard to create, and we're not very good at it yet, but we like to lower the barriers to entry to the federal government to make it easy to make that loop and come back. Because one of our challenges is our hiring process can be painful. Even when we have what we call direct hire authority for cybersecurity, then the security clearance process can be painful and time consuming, and we lose a lot of people in that process. So in terms of keeping the best people, our biggest focus is on mission. We are never going to pay enough to get someone who is, as we used to say in the field, coin operated, as that their main concern is about how much money they can make. But folks who are mission driven are going to come to the government, and they're going to, and once they get there, they often will stay, not because we're paying them great money, but because it's an amazing mission. So we really focus on getting people in the door by having a great mission, and then getting them to stay by having a great mission and giving them exciting things to do. And there's a couple of things we're doing right now. We've had a big emphasis on internships for college students. This past year, DOE launched a new internship program that we call the Omni internship. And the goal is to put students in 3 internships over their time in college at different DOE facilities, a national lab, a site, a department element at headquarters. And then at the end of that, they're ready to get a security clearance. They can get an offer, they can have a clearance before they graduate, and we can get them into the federal ecosystem. Because we believe that once someone gets a taste of the mission, many of those folks will stay. I mean, there are a lot of people in senior leadership at DOE who started as college interns. And honestly, having our lab ecosystem, helps, because we can have folks in the federal service for the mission, but we also can have folks in the labs for the mission. And they're in the private sector. They're making, they make more money than I do, right? So they can make more money and still be engaged in that important federal mission for us. So that's another option that we have that helps expand the numbers of ways that we can keep people working for the government that other departments and agencies don't have. We also have some sort of band-aids in terms of special cyber pay authorities that we're using in the federal government, but they really are, they're not great. They're helping.
They cannot compete with the outside salaries.
No, if I can give you a 10% increase, that maybe that'll help you, get past that tuition bill you got this year for your college age kid. It's not going to make the difference when you go in public to private. It's really got to be that mission. And also the other thing I'll add is just there's a number of fellowships that the federal government has started to have. It's a pretty small impact, but we can get some really smart people to come in for a couple of years and have that public sector experience and go back to the private sector on one of these fellowships, which have a little lower barrier to entry and are term limited. So we got a number of tools we try and use, but it comes down always to they got to be excited about the mission or they're not going to stick around.
Well, I feel very strongly related to what you described, because yes, we share the same problem, and the gaps are getting bigger. As cybersecurity becomes a larger issue, a larger market, a larger industry, and they pay a little more. And as you said, I can testify now, after 33 years in the government, I'm 8.5 months outside. Imagine that, since the age of 17, I didn't know anything else. And nothing, there's a lot of thrills and fun outside, but nothing compares to the mission, to the action, to the feeling of protecting your country, your people, as you have in the federal government and in the real mission. And another thing is it's an industry that spread of the word. So a friend brings another friend. So if they have a good experience working under the government, then it spreads like a good pandemic. It brings another people on board, and that's in its turn make the higher level of expertise of people, and that brings more. So it's all the time balancing. And one of the good example I can share with you, it's CyberGym. You know, the founder of CyberGym is one of my ex-employees in the National Security Forces, Phil Hasson. And when he told me 8 or 9 years ago, after being a lieutenant colonel in our service, that's okay, he had enough and he had a great idea, innovative ideas, and needs to go out to do something. I didn't stop him. I said, okay, but don't forget. And he didn't forget. And he worked with the government, assisting the government and assisting critical infrastructure. No one else could have assisted other than someone that came from the system. So it's all the time, not just, we or them, but us working together and understanding that, as you said, one time in the first chapter, they work here, then second chapter, maybe there, and third chapter, maybe return back to the government and bring the experience and the expertise, and that enrich the full cycle all the time. And thank you for that. Simone, I think that we have many questions from the audience, so maybe I'll stop and let some of the questions from the audience.
Great, thank you. So the first question is directed to Anne, and the question is, the US government funds nuclear labs operated by private operators. How can you ensure that these operators are not infiltrated by enemy states?
Well, that's a great question. So the first thing is, from the outside, you would be hard pressed to tell that our labs are run, that our nuclear labs are run by the private sector. I mean, you go to UC Berkeley and go to Lawrence Livermore Berkeley Lab, which is an open science lab. You can tell, right? It's a different world. But if you go to one of our national labs that is focused on nuclear security, you're going to be hard pressed to tell the difference. You're going to see lots of military folks at those labs. Some of them are actually on military bases. You're going to see lots of feds around there, and you're going to be hard pressed to know who's a fed and who's an employee of, say, Battelle or whatever the company is. And that's so that's a cultural thing, right? It's how we behave, but it also means that there's a bunch of security behaviors behind that. So those folks have to be cleared, just like I do in terms of security clearance, depending upon their role in the mission. They may need as much as a top secret SCI clearance to do their job. In fact, many people at those labs need those clearances. So those involve extensive background checks. I've been through those clearance processes multiple times. You're not going to hide a lot from the federal government when you go through a clearance process like that, in particular things like your background and your associations, which is not to say the government is perfect, right? We have had security failures in the past. We do our very, very best to ensure that we don't have security failures in the future. And I think, the point here is you really can't tell the difference between that lab being run by a private contractor and that lab being run by the government in terms of how secure it is and the security culture. I've been to 3 of the 4, no, actually all 4 of the labs that are run, the nuclear labs, and they're extremely secure, extremely well managed, take their mission and the security of their mission very seriously. So, you know, no promises, but we do everything we possibly can.
Great, thank you for that. The next question I think I will address to both of you, whoever wants to take it. Can cyber regulation keep pace with the changes in the new cyber threats emerging in the world?
I can begin with saying no, very simply. Well, don't wait for regulation. This is one of the major slides that I have in my permanent presentation to decision makers all around the globe. Now I work internationally helping governments. It never keep up the pace of technology. By the way, both made by the same human beings, by us, by the people. But the technology runs much faster than any of the what we call regulations, which is the norms and the behavior and the practices that we try to enforce on ourselves. So I can tell you, in Israel, we still don't have a cyber law. Imagine that. We issued the first draft in June 2018, and now it's September 2022. It's still a draft. We have some, you may be heard of our political instability, but it's larger than that. So we are still need to work. We're still operating, and it's soft regulation. But you should have regulation, but bear in mind, don't wait for it. Don't depend on it. It's a good assistance, but not something to rely on.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's much we can add to that. I think, you know, I used to work in a relatively small organization, actually a school district, and I'd call our attorney and he would say, well, you know, the law is not able to cover that, does not cover that question yet. The law was not designed for that technical question. So the regulation is never going to keep up. And in fact, you know, right now, we have some regulation regarding the cloud and the power sector that we are trying to deal with because we think it's holding us back. So even in the government, right, we're struggling to have regulations work for us. So absolutely, it's do your work and don't wait for someone to regulate you. And the other part of that, I will say, is that as a good actor, if you're out there doing the right things, you can influence what the regulation looks like later and make it be something that works best for both public and the private sector, as opposed to waiting for regulation and maybe getting regulation that doesn't really solve the problem or meet your needs. Because you know, we all know that that it takes a lot of expertise, and the folks with the expertise aren't always the folks writing regulations. We try, right? We try and have that be the case. I worked for a regulatory agency in the past. We tried very hard to make sure our folks writing regulations understood things and talked to the industry, but we're never going to keep up.
So true. Thank you for your honesty on that. I think the next question, Igal, I'm going to pose this one to you. It says, as energy companies adopt automated technologies, but I think in general, as you know, all companies are becoming more and more automated. Maybe even they adopt AI. How do you see the role of a CISO changing and evolving with the move towards artificial intelligence?
Oh, it's going to get harder, tougher, and more challenging because AI basically is imitating or trying to imitate human behavior in not so many words. And one of the biggest problems in human behavior, it's full of flaws and errors and mistakes. And we see in more and more simulations of AI that is usually developed to work around it or bypass or correct the tendency of people to do mistakes. Well, actually, it's at the end goes to the opposite. And if not, then it's too anticipated and therefore very easy prey for hackers and attackers. So it's a good call for all CISOs here in the audience and everywhere. Don't rely, at least not blindly, on AI solutions or AI, because it's a nice buzzword and everyone is using that. And I haven't met a startup yet, and now I see dozens of them in VC and other places. They all put AI somewhere in their pitch. Okay. Some of them really do, but it's not a fool's gold. But if not taken properly, then it can be very, very frustrating, if not dangerous. I think, Anne, you can add to that also.
Well, I think, yeah, I'll just carry on that thought. The newest technology is always going to be the panacea. It's going to solve every problem you've ever had. And for those of you familiar with Gartner, they have a graph, right? I'm sure you've seen it, Igal. It goes like this, right? And this is the peak of inflated expectations. And this is I think they don't call it the trough of despair, but it's sort of like that. It's like, everyone's really excited about this technology. It goes up here, and then everyone realizes, yeah, it's not that good. And it's got its uses, and it goes out and it plateaus. And AI and ML are definitely at that peak of inflated expectations right now. We will find the places where it is most valuable, and there are lots of places where it will be valuable to us, but it will not solve all our problems. And to your point, it's going to complicate things. It's going to potentially give advantages to the bad guys too, because if every technology gives us advantages, and it gives advantages to the attackers. So we're going to have to look for how they're going to use that, and how that's going to make them better, and what new attack vectors it's going to cause, and new challenges. So it never really, nothing makes it easier. It seems like everything that we get just makes it more challenging for cybersecurity.
I think that's a great headline for this webinar. And if I may add, use some of your 17 national laboratories to research the the adversarial AI thing. It's something that grows more and more, and I met with some very terrifying examples of how AI can fool AI.
Yeah, there's some scary stuff out there. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere at a lab working on it. We'll have to go find out.
Fantastic. I think that draws us to a close. We don't seem to have any further questions. We really want to.
So we were clear.
Yeah. We want to extend our thanks to you both for your time and for this conversation, and we hope to hold more of these in the future.
Absolutely.
Any closing remarks you'd like to make, Igal?
Well, just to thank you all, and thank you, Anne. It's like always a real pleasure, and sharpening the minds, talking to you and meeting with you. And thank you for all your cooperation with Israel along these years. And not much can be said, but it should be mentioned and appreciated. Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah, as always, a pleasure talking with you, and great to be here. And we look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Anne.
I'm trying to, my mouse is misbehaving. See y'all.
Bye.